Can you explain that for people who doesn't know what you're talking about? You wouldn't disregard the basement.
Yes.
Please.
Well, as Jody has the egg diagram was, I think, a seminal contribution to psychology. And he drew that, he developed that in the early 30s.
And for those who aren't aware, that's a map of consciousness,
Exactly.
human consciousness.
And so those three levels of consciousness, the lower unconscious, all about our history and what we suppress and repress. Middle unconscious, the level of some suppression, but also where we're more or less conscious of the dynamics inside us. And then what he described as the superconscious, that adds a huge dimension to the psyche, to understanding the psyche. And then as the context for the whole thing, he talks about the self. And the expression or the reflection of the self as the I. The I. And that model in the soup of collective unconscious describes, I think, brilliantly the human being, psyche. And he understood that. So the basement in terms of history, the ground floor in terms of our middle unconscious, and then the higher floors, or even the terrace, is about the superconscious. Now, important, it's not static. We must be careful not to hold that in a static sense, And as you know, Joan and Jarlath, Joan particularly developed a new model to look at that dynamically in terms of the triphasic model they developed in the late 90s, to look at how the evolution of consciousness takes place. And I think that's a real contribution we make here, actually, through that model.
I just want to also, just for those who aren't so aware of it, the egg is like the map of consciousness,
Yes,
but you were
exactly.
also alluding there as well to something that the Institute specifically came up with, which was almost like a progression
Yes.
through time, where someone's
Exactly.
evolution. So the nature of the egg wouldn't necessarily always look the same as you move through
Well, it's
time.
quite static, you see, so it's not energetic. And I think what Joan did in really building the triphasic, it took it to another, because you can map the evolution of will and the self through the triphasic. But most importantly, the context for all of that is the self, and the self exists at each of these levels. And that's what people forget. If you're an analyst, you don't even have that in your mind, and you're just working to build ego. But ego is another expression, if you like, of the self attempting to emerge.